principal with Marks and Lundy and is a former chair of the Giving Institute and of the Giving USA Foundation. Following her will be Michael Sinkus. He's also a senior consultant and principal, and he leads our higher education practice group. And Michael will actually be addressing both higher education and independent schools today, so he'll do the entire education segment. David Gillig is a senior consultant with Marks and Lundy and experienced in health sciences. He's a member of our health sciences practice group, so David will be discussing healthcare and the related sectors. Willard White is senior consultant and principal and leader of our arts and culture group. He will actually be addressing arts and culture, environment, and animal welfare. And finally, I wanted to let you know that Tina Donahue is on the call with us as well. Tina will be assisting me as a co-organizer and looking at questions as they come in. Tina is one of our senior analysts at Marks and Lundy and has been very involved in our work with Giving USA with the report. So just a little information before I turn it over to Nancy. We thought you might be interested in what our group looks like today. The majority of folks are here from the education sector, but we do have good representation from across all the sectors. In this widespread interest in translating this Giving USA report into strategies that are relevant to our area of work is exactly why our panel today comprises consultants that each have significant depth of experience in one or more of these sectors. So we're pleased to see the nice representation across the sectors today. We were curious as to how you've used data in the past. You know, has it prompted change? And a fifth of you actually said, yeah, that you have made a strategic change based on Giving USA reports in the past. The majority of you, however, said you weren't sure, you hadn't made changes. So today's discussion about strategic implications perhaps offers some additional ways of thinking about the data and how to use it. We also wondered if you have ever been asked to share or interpret the data with outside stakeholders, and sometimes I would imagine that could be challenging depending on your institution's performance relative to the sector. Most of you have not been asked to do that. Again, though, this discussion today will hopefully help you shape a narrative around the Giving USA report that perhaps could easily be shared with your stakeholders if you're ever called upon to do so. So I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Nancy at this point. So Nancy, let's begin. Nancy?
The important piece, yes. The important piece here is that our conversation is about making strategic use of the Giving USA 2013 report. These numbers have been gathered, assembled, analyzed for the last 40 years. The key here is what do we do with these numbers. So the first thing that's important here is that Giving USA is a publication of the Giving USA Foundation and of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And there are many academics and many practitioners who are involved in this process. It's peer-reviewed, and we're quite proud to be a part of it. Marks and Lundy has been a long-term supporter and contributor to the research and to the foundation. So again, we're glad to have this opportunity to talk in more detail about the findings. An important piece here is that the estimates that we are reporting on are just that, they're estimates. And from year to year, there are revisions to these numbers as the IRS numbers become available. So if you were to go back in time and look at numbers, they have changed as we have revised them. It's an all part of a process of modeling numbers, but it gives us the opportunity to provide estimates that are current. What we don't have here are projections, and our team will be talking about what we hope can happen and what we would like to project the future numbers to be. But these are estimates, and they're about 2012. Today, we're going to go over those 2012 numbers with some focus with the help of my colleagues on other sectors, but in many ways, these trends apply to all of us. So while we'll be able to go into depth on each, I think you will find sort of meaning in the overview as well. So if we can turn to the next slide. This is the optimism slide. 40 years worth of giving and philanthropic giving in this country. The bars represent inflation-adjusted numbers. The darker bars are the numbers in regular years. The lighter bars are recession years. And the line, the gold line, shows the current current dollar estimate. It's quite an optimistic look on what has happened in philanthropy over 40 years. Yes, during recessions we've taken a dip, but we've come back. We're at $306 billion at this point. It's something to be quite proud of. In terms of when we get back to where we were, 2007, well, as I said, this is the optimism slide, and it's up to us and how we conduct our, us combined, how we conduct our fundraising over the next few years. The academics are suggesting it'll take us another 6 or 7 years at our current rate of increase. But again, the numbers are up to the work that we do. So if we turn to the next slide is the opportunity picture. There's much sort of hand-wringing about our inability to get above 2% of GDP in terms of philanthropic giving. We were up for a time in the early part, 2002, 2003, up to 2007, but we can't seem to climb really out of that. If GDP is at 15.7 trillion, estimated to be 15.9 trillion, it's going to take us $155 billion to move that from 2% to 3%. If you're familiar with the Chronicle of Philanthropy review on Giving USA, they estimated that if everyone gave up their morning coffee, we could easily raise $220 billion, and that would move us up to the 3%. But this is the opportunity. This is what we should be looking towards in terms of how we're increasing the share of the GDP pie in this country. If we turn to the next slide, we'll take a look at the sources of money, the sources of philanthropic support. I am sure that everyone on this webinar is quite familiar with the fact that individuals give the lion's share of giving. But I never am totally surprised when I'm in a room discussing or on the phone discussing charitable giving that not everybody understands that individuals drive philanthropic giving. So clearly, $229 billion came from individuals at 72%. But part of the foundation giving at 15% includes family foundations, and that in many ways is considered individual giving. And bequest giving is also considered individual giving. So on this chart, we have almost 86% of money coming from individuals. It's an important part. There are times when donors and board members think that, in fact, the corporate money and the foundation money is much larger, but it's all about individuals. The good news on this chart is corporations have increased, and individuals have sort of led the charge. I'll talk more about that in a minute. If we can move on to the next slide, which is the familiar story of the recipients in terms of charitable giving. Not much has changed. Religion has dominated charitable giving, largely, of course, from individuals. The number has declined over the years, and we'll show that in a minute. Education comes next, and human services is about the same. Human services is largely driven by our charitable need. It works well as stories about need are part of the media. Clearly, during the recession, there was a lot of emphasis placed on contributing more to human services. But the human service sector is not as organized as the education sector, So it really is optimistic for our country, too, that so much has been going to human services. The other sectors, which we'll talk about as well, gifts to foundations have become a source is foundation, private foundation giving, receiving it, and that have been set up has become more important. Health, public society benefits, international affairs, arts and culture, and environment all receive pretty much the same resources they have from year to year. If we move on to the next slide, taking a look at the changes. The most important points on this chart, the gold lines represent the current year, 2011 to 2012, is that corporate giving has increased. The belief and understanding, although we can't separate all of the numbers, is that's largely driven by in-kind giving, largely pharmaceuticals, but this is the first time in a while that corporate giving has increased by a full percentage point. The individual giving has also increased. It's about $9 billion more in individual gifts, and that's where we're focusing. That seems to be the best opportunity. That's what's going to drive the change. Foundation giving is largely driven by assets in the stock market. If we look now towards the slide on the recipients and the change, this is sort of the winners and losers chart. But please don't pay attention to it. This is the kind of chart that, we're up, we're down. But it's only year to year, and it's largely a function of what happened in the prior year. If there were large bequests going to certain organizations and that declined, you see those difference in receipts on the giving side. If human services was down one year and it comes back the next year, the number goes up. So this is not to be a scorecard, but it is a way of sort of capturing quickly. We've often had clients say to us, our board members come to us and say, it's up, why are we not up? Or it's down, but it's down less than we're down. Don't try to use this as a scorecard. It's a way of looking at things. Next year will be better if this year is down. If we move on to the next slide, and we take a look at the shifts in sources, we see that individuals have been primarily the major source of giving over the 40 years. The change from 82% in the first 5-year segment, 1973 to 1977, to the last is really a reflection of the growth of family foundations. So you see the next bar of the foundation growing from 6.6% to 14.4%. That's where the change has occurred. Clearly, the good news is once the money moves into foundations, there is clearly a 5% number that is used, the foundations try to maintain in terms of giving. So there's a feeling that there's some permanent money available on the foundation side. The bequests are clearly a function of settlement of large estates, and that's where we see that number. And then the corporate number is sort of largely the same over this time period. If we move on to the changes in the recipients over the same 40-year period, again, religion has been reduced clearly over a period of time. The theory is that as more people have more discretionary income, they take care of their religious institutions, but then have the opportunity to provide more philanthropic gifts to other sectors that they care about. My colleagues will talk about the changes in their sector and what affects the giving in each of their sectors. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michael to talk more about education.
Michael, I'm not sure if the audience can hear you. I can't hear you, so can you check your audio controls and make sure that you are not muted on your end?
Hello, everybody. I was muted and I didn't know it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hello to all my friends out there, and you know who you are, and I'll catch up with you here in the next days or weeks or months. I'd like to give you a big picture look here of giving to education in the next slide. Isn't that exciting? That's a great slide. It shows, of course, and very much mirrors the rise in GDP. It also shows every little dip that has occurred here in the past 40 years. You could look at 1982 when the Reagan recession with high interest rates, and there was a dip. And it even shows the crash in 1987. Giving decline then, and then the George Bush the first recession in 1990 and 91, and then a takeoff again with the dot-com boom, and then the dot-com burst in 2002, again a little decline, and then of course the big dip in the Great Recession, and we're climbing slowly out of the Great Recession right now. There's two stories here in this big picture. One is how resilient giving to education has remained. The slide doesn't say that over the last 40 years, since 1972, that giving to education has stayed at 13%, even as the pie has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. The other story, I believe, is that this is very sensitive to the tracking of the ways of the economy, and at least on the macro level. Those of you listening from public institutions, public universities, will know that you endured a 30% decline in the years of the Great Recession. So this is certainly a factor. I would say, as a momentum investor, and that's a cliche for what are the trends and the like, I would say that we're coming out of this, obviously, and we are following the tepid recovery, and I think it's safe to come out of the woods in the big picture, and it's also probably a time to be investing more. The next panel here shows I would call the past and the present, some of which I've spoken about already, the inelasticity of giving to education. The good news for those of you in that sector is that the number of institutions has stayed quite stable. The Giving USA data is based on the CAE data representing about 2,000 of the 5,000 colleges and universities and independent schools. I'll speak about that in a while, but I will also say that 14%, as the pie grows, spread across 2,000 institutions, is a largely increasing number. I've spoken about the sensitivity of the economic expansions and contractions. I think the 1990s expansion was also accompanied by a change in practice. And that change in practice in educational institutions was a more pronounced turn toward major giving and principal giving as anchor manners of securing larger and larger sums. Again, I'll speak a little bit more about that, but that accompanied an economic expansion, and that major gift emphasis, I believe, had a big effect on how changes occurred in practice. We are coming out of this. We are, just as the daily reports speak about the tepid recovery. I think that again, that's mirrored in the manner in which these 2012 results show, and so we are trapped, or we are also part of the big picture here, and I think that's important to state. Looking ahead in the next slide and for higher education, and after that I'll speak about independent schools. I think that what's happening in the 24-hour news stream is that education has become a mainstream topic. It's happening in the publics with the emphasis on the legislatures and the tax dollars. It's happening in the privates. I was at a Florida private university. I believe two of you are on the line. I won't identify you, but they did a wonderful thing. They spent 2 hours at the last board meeting explaining to trustees their own finances. It took a lot of smart people 2 hours to explain the intricacies of the economics of higher education, but the exercise was extremely valuable because the media is on this, the issues of student debt, the issues of the cost of higher education. These are daily topics in USA Today, in the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. So I think that it's true that the failure to address this and the difference in the teaching models and in the manner in which education is delivered, if we don't come out with this, with our own stories about our positions on these issues, and if we don't make the finances of higher education clear, I believe that could result in some maybe some heavier water than we would otherwise want to experience. So this is no longer we know better than everybody else. Our economic model is different than everybody else's. I think that this is mainstream information and of extreme importance on the micro level for colleges and universities and schools to be telling this story in a better fashion. The whole issue of can a student learn a course on the internet? Are teachers still necessary? Is the concrete expansion of higher education important? I think we need to bring these things out in the open rather than considering them as topics that everyone would otherwise not care about, because I think the press does care about it. Ever since 1988, participation rates of giving to education have declined. It has been incessant. There has not been a reversal, and I actually tie this personally to the rising cost of higher education and to all of the issues about which I just spoke. I think that even the average college graduate of a public or private institution looks at the cost of higher education, even though they may or may not know that the cost isn't the cost, and that's one of the mysteries. I believe that they may walk away concluding that no one needs their $500 gift. And I think that it's also happening more and more that people, even college graduates, are perceiving, however incorrectly, that they can't afford a higher education for their children. And I think that this declining rate of participation, it's happened at almost every institution. It doesn't end well, because the discovery of donors into the process of multiple year engagement and larger giving with fewer and fewer people doesn't make economic sense in the end. We've made up for this through the years by getting bigger and bigger gifts from fewer and fewer people. And that's been the benefit of the major gift emphasis. But I think we have to look at this other issue too. We have become very dependent on the proverbial top 1%, all the way down to the top 10% of donors. I like to say that half of people are givers and half aren't. So about 20% of people fill out the long form, which means that population is made up, when you take the non-givers out, of about 10% of the population. I think that we have to spend, if 90% of the money comes from 10% of the people, we probably need to spend 90% of our time on 10% of the people, and I'm not sure that everybody does. But that is the manner in which the big changes have occurred and will occur. I think that these continued emphasis on major gift programs and principal gift programs are continue to be the key for success. With increased competition, what I'm seeing is that another level of public and private institutions and on the independent school side, charter schools are getting into this business. I think it's slow, but I think we could see a rise of competition here and spreading that out over more players. I think there's plenty to go around, but that is definitely what I see occurring right now. Finally, in higher education, and this is a real joy for me, I'm seeing that the emphasis on what I might call football and nostalgia has been joined with an emphasis on the intellectual content of higher education. And this, I believe, is the way out. I believe that it is the trumpeting of the value of academic research, the value of these institutions to the region and to the state and to the nation, and it is the emphasis on the value of an increasingly highly educated citizenry and leadership. These are the answers. And yes, sports are important, but I see even at the sports factories, and I've seen this now throughout my career, that when we start talking about the educational content, that better things happen. I think that the alumni long for what they no longer have, which was that 4-year stimulation of intellectual engagement, and that's what they're thirsting for. So I say avoid the issues of the mainstream at your peril, and also add in this whole aspect of intellectual content, because I think it's what the people want.
Michael,
on the next slide, I'm going to be a bad stand-in here for Tracy Savage, who at the last minute couldn't join us. I joked with her that those of you who are friends with her will report to her whether or not her entire career has been sullied by my remarks. Independent schools, too, have joined the major gift emphasis. But I have to say, and Tracy agrees, that they haven't done this with the same amount of conviction. So there's in the shop of the independent school, there often are too many competing things to do, and even though they know that that major gifts is where it's at, I think that they find that they get distracted. And what the leaders have shown is that the more they emphasize the major gift side, the better they do. And this is creeping into independent education. It's becoming more understood by the boards, and I would consider that a trend here, led by the more mature schools as they have succeeded. As they have moved toward that, again, that 10%, what has been discovered, I think, across the independent school world is that parents reign supreme. It used to be thought that alumni were the holy grail, and the alumni are the holy grail, but parents are in this day every day. And so the emphasis on parent giving has very much, wherever it's taken up, it has paid off, and this emphasis on parent giving for major gifts has also paid off. So I would say that that's one of the big discoveries over the last 5 years, and I would say that that's going to continue unabated here over the next 5. The same Main Street, yes?
No, we're gonna need to move on. Your enthusiasm is terrific. We need.
Okay, I will finish up then by saying that the biggest issue here for schools is they are no longer islands. Schools now are parts of communities, and they're finding that they can link themselves to their communities with some success and giving benefit to the communities besides just giving benefit to their schools. I think this is a great trend. I think it elevates private schools in a manner that is very important, and I would hope that those of you on the call and on the phone would recognize that and understand the benefit of that moving forward. I thank you for listening this far, and I hope I've shed some light on some things for you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to move us along to David Gillig now, who is going to speak about health sciences. David?
Good afternoon and good morning to colleagues around the country. I'm here as a stand-in for Doug Stewart, who is our health sciences practice group leader, and he is in a place where he can't get internet. So I'm here standing in, and he, as Michael said, if I do poorly by him, then I will apologize in advance. But I'm glad to be here and looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you. If you look at this slide showing the growth of philanthropy in support of health, 1972 to 2012, there's a remarkable resilience to health philanthropy. Now, what we can't see in here is how much of that was given for research versus how much for health sciences. They're mixed together. But there are a couple of things that are notable. First of all, the dip following the Great Recession, 2008, is not as great as we've seen in other sectors. Health was resilient comparatively during that recession period. As well, maybe even more importantly, it rebounded very quickly and actually came back to the point where it had been before in this sector and actually set an all-time record. As compared to other parts, other sectors of charitable organizations, health has been incredibly resilient. It's also remained about 9% of the total of philanthropy. That has jumped up and down between about 13 down to 7, but averaging out the years, it's remained pretty solid for a number of years now as well. When you look at the increases in the last 2 years, those are healthy as well. They've seen pretty good increases for the last 2 years during a tumultuous time in healthcare philanthropy, or in healthcare and health for the United States at least, during the last 2 years. Amidst all of this are some other things that are bad news, and if we go to the next slide, we can take a look at a couple of those. We have the good news on it rebounding, but we also have some bad news. In particular, and let me rephrase, I don't know if I'd call this bad news. I would call it big challenges. We who have been in health for a while were experienced in mergers and acquisitions during the 80s and the 90s up through the early 2000s, and it seemed to kind of level out for a while. There's a brand new round going on right now. Many of us believe that it's going to be quite extreme for at least the next several years. And those of you who have been through this before understand that philanthropy in health, particularly in health care, is extremely local. And when people look at an institution that they have affinity with, or belong to, or part of their family, and the name changes, the people change, they become part of a system or part of a larger group in some way, it can have a negative impact on philanthropy. As well, there is a push right now to what's often referred to as rationalization of medicine. If there's two institutions in a city or a region that have large cancer centers that are competing for a number of years, that then come together into one merged entity, there will be a call by the community and by leaders to look at the possibility of regionalizing or rationalizing that to one cancer center. Obviously, those institutions that do that are going to have an impact on the relationships they have with their donors who have history of supporting one of those institutions and are deeply affiliated with those institutions. Healthcare reform is not on the list here, but I would identify as something that I would call a huge challenge for the donor intent from the standpoint of uncertainty. That's really what donors are now looking at from the standpoint of what does it all mean? And where would my gift have the biggest impact? What will happen to my gift? What's going to happen to the institution that I'm giving to? And in some cases, some of these consolidations and mergers are creating what I would refer to as intramural competition, where the system may be combined into one large entity, but in fact the institutions within the system may act rather independently within the same region or even the same city and be out asking for gifts competitively when in fact they're part of the same system. And that again can be confusing to donors. The deep pocket perception by some that if my institution, my hospital is now part of a large system, don't they have access to big pockets of money? Why is my gift important now as opposed to before when I could see clearly that it existed on its own financially and I could understand the finances and its needs more carefully. So if we go to the next page, one of the, I'm going to stay with the bad news here for a little bit, come back to HIP in a minute, and again I'd call it a challenge, is declining government support for biomedical research, and I would also say perceived or potential declining government support for reimbursement for healthcare as well. For biomedical research, this is a really big deal, and as we look at what funding is going to be available at NIH, those institutions that we support that are involved in major research programming, we're going to be seeing a lot of grants dry up and very, very difficult renewal processes, and grant funding probably decline substantially over the next few years. It really has already started. And what that means is those great scientists that we have on our teams that we want to retain, the door they're going to knock on is going to be the foundation or the philanthropy development program. And the focus will be from both C-suite and the board on finding resources philanthropically to fund gaps as well as possibly grow research over time. But historically, we've looked to grow and add to what is available through NIH grant funding. I think we're going to be looking more at filling gaps that are going to be created by the drop in grant funding from government over the next few years. In reimbursement, it's very difficult and I know many of our institutions are programming now, doing projections on what reimbursement patterns are out there, what it's going to look like if we're in ACOs, what it looks like when we bring physicians into the system and combine our resources. But at the end of the day, what it really creates for donors is great uncertainty. They just don't understand how it all is going to work, and they're concerned in many cases about their ability to make a gift to an entity that they understand, that they believe will continue to thrive. So having said all that, there are some really positive things in addition to the things I mentioned first around grateful patients, in particular the new HIPAA guidelines, give us an opportunity to be much more engaged in getting information appropriately and legally to engage physicians and grateful patients in a manner to encourage philanthropic support. The outcome of all this, in my view, are these ideas as to how we utilize this data. One, I think we can have a confidence that philanthropy for health is resilient, that it will continue to be resilient amidst all of the uncertainty, all of the media attention on health. And in many cases, healthcare providers being seen to some degree as a bad guy in the discussion about healthcare reform in the United States, that their costs are out of control, that they don't manage their resources well. Amidst all of that, people are still giving, and they're giving generously, and they're giving in a resilient manner. So we can have a confidence as development officers in the boardroom, in the C-suite, that philanthropy can continue to grow, can continue to be a big part of our mission support. I think that can convert into the idea of investment in philanthropy. We can go to our C-suites and propose to them that philanthropy does have an opportunity for growth, and that an investment can create growth. We're going to be called upon to probably look at changing our cases for support. There's going to be an opportunity, I think, for many of our systems to look at how we manage our resources in a way to improve health beyond just those who are ill and need to be in an acute setting. There's going to be a call to be out in the community and improving health status. That's going to call on us to look at our cases for support differently. We're going to be asked to do that by C-suites and board members and the community. And then finally, I do think that the fundamental of grateful patient fundraising is stronger than ever, and we can be even more innovative, particularly with the new HIPAA guidelines, in engaging our physicians and our patients in a way to gain affinity, to gain philanthropic support, and gain engagement. Hope I've been able to provide a couple of ideas that are helpful. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, David. Willard?
Willard, I'm turning the controls over to you now.
Hi, Lori. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you now.
Yes, thank you very much. Please, the next slide. Let's look at giving to arts, culture, and humanities, where we see a pattern very similar to the drop and the Great Recession, 08, 09 particularly, but the upturn is encouraging. This and the next slide also, which is the sector we call really conservation and animal welfare. I work in both of these groups. These are market-sensitive, market-responsive organizations, whether causes or fixed destinations that we understand and analyze a little differently. Note on the environment and animal track, which is a more recent piece of analysis from Giving USA, the drop from, while it's still the smallest sector, it's interesting that the drop in philanthropy after 08 was less steep, was more moderate than the drop for arts, culture, and humanity, which was very hard hit in some of its subsectors. On the next slide, we're going to look that these are traditionally the smallest recipient sectors. However, they are still an enormous pot of philanthropy that is moving into organizations, institutions, and causes that are highly valued by communities, the nation, and increasingly internationally for some of our environmental causes. This is very encouraging news, the uptick. Note, however, that we are not back to 07 levels, and that tends to be true across all of the sectors within, whether it's arts and culture, environment, and animal welfare. There are the emphasis on mega gift raising, major gift, mega gift raising has been part of these sectors, similar to health services and higher education. Note that that has some of the dollars you see captured here include gifts of a scale such as Alice Walton's $800 million for Crystal Bridges and others in 2010 from other families. This is actually, again, a positive sign of recovery. Within these sectors, however, the results are actually mixed for reasons that involve many of us, engage many of us. The traditional performing arts in our country are very challenged in maintaining and strengthening their support, both in audience development and in philanthropy. And within the environment and conservation area, the gardens and zoos tend to be doing very, very well. They are fixed destinations with very direct benefits and value to their communities, and they are messaging to appeal to get the content of the conservation movement and sustainability issues that do resonate in these times. The competition, any of us who have, all of us who run programs, I assume we are an audience today of mostly fundraising professionals. There's always been competition over these many decades. And even in the best times, up to 07, the number of fundraising organizations was growing actually faster, at a faster rate than the total pool of dollars for these sectors. We tend to notice it, but looking back, it may explain why there always seem to be challenging goals ahead and issues to deal with. Please look at the next slide, and we will, if we can imagine the future, the moment is still, we're still in tough times, and caution is dominating. Why call this a back to the future movement? It's back to basics of what all of us did in our early days in fundraising. It is really about focusing the missions of our organizations and making the case for the value of what we do in our organization, be it animal welfare or a symphony orchestra. There must be impacts. What are the benefits? Who are the beneficiaries of what we do? And that does, similar to higher education, there is a greater emphasis on the content and the educational role and the urgently needed benefits to society, be they local, national, or international. Something else, energize your base is a very big category. You look at the large conservation groups, animal welfare groups with hundreds of thousands of members. Analyzing that data, converting basic members to annual donors, really focusing on leadership annual giving as the indicator of future long-term financial success in this area, using data analysis, use disciplined research, use personalized, tailored strategies of engagement, not just for the major gift track, which we will never ignore, all of us, but really focus on that middle and go to the base that is already in your family in the conversation. Leadership annual giving, major gifts, legacy gifts, very important. One final comment. The numbers we're looking at for these two slides, arts and culture, conservation, animal welfare, are all about what we call pure philanthropy. They do not track what is a growing area of opportunity for conservation groups, animal welfare groups, every museum, garden, zoo that we know, and orchestra. And that's corporate sponsorships. We looked at corporate dollars increasing on the philanthropy side, including in-kind giving, very important. The real growth is in corporate sponsorships, and that is a very big topic to look at for every organization in the two sectors. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Willard. Go ahead, Nancy.
No, it's now time for questions. Lori, the best way to ask questions?
I'll tell you, we do have quite a few, and we certainly want to get to as many as possible. So Tina and I are going to take turns introducing questions to the panelists. Several people have asked, however, if you can have a copy of today's presentation. And unfortunately, because it contains Giving USA slides, we are not allowed to distribute it. However, I am going to share with you the link to where you can go to download the executive, sorry about that, the executive summary for free. And it is at givingusareports.org/2013. So you can get those highlights for free, and then of course I suppose the actual report itself is available for purchase. So with that, Tina, would you like to ask our panelists the first question, please?
Great, thanks, Lori. So the first question we received was, do we know what percentage of the foundation giving is giving by family foundations?
About 45%.
Okay, great.
So this is a question about the GDP slide. For many years, we've been told that a massive transfer of wealth was coming. Since giving stays around 2% of GDP, is that transfer of wealth impacting philanthropy as much as was anticipated? And what can we expect regarding transfer of wealth and philanthropy in the future?
That's a major question, and some of it relates to different sectors. But we certainly have not seen the transfer of wealth into philanthropy that some had predicted 10 years ago. Others might suggest that we're fortunate to remain at 2%, and some of that may be because of the transfer of gifts, the bequests that have added to each of the recipients in major ways. We don't have those numbers, though, at this point.
Okay. Any other responses? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This is for you, Michael, and it's a really good one. It asked, do you believe that declining giving participation is in part tied to the public perception of major gift work and bigger campaign numbers being public? So what does my $25 gift mean to an institution with a public goal of $1.3 billion campaign, or even a $20 million campaign?
There is anecdotal evidence to suggest that. When Dartmouth finished its last campaign, it lost about 10% on its very enviable alumni giving totals. And it did what they thought they should do. They went and asked why. And the answer mostly was, well, hey, we saw you're getting those $5 million gifts, and I just figured it didn't need my 500. And so that is an issue. And the antidote to it is to celebrate every gift, to figure out a way to celebrate every gift, figure out a way to say how every gift is important, and to also give the comprehensive campaign its due, which is, hey, every gift to every institution counts in the campaign, and I'm part of this too. So yes, there's no question it's an issue, and there are good ways to address it. Thanks, it's a great one.
And just, Michael, a follow-up to that related to parent and alumni giving participation. This seems to be a key question that several of the members of our audience raised about, the decline in alumni participation and just sort of chasing those downward trends and how we turn that around.
Well, I think it requires micro action. All of this information, most of this information that we've been giving today is in the macro. So there are methods of focusing on participation that do work, challenges and the like. However, I'm also worried that not all organizations can afford to be chasing participation. It's a double-edged sword. But I think that what's happening is that we are reaching the point, a possible point of alumni giving of no return. and we need to figure out what our communications can be, and I think we need to figure out its source and why those declines are continuing.
You know, Michael, at the risk of giving you the entire stage for the rest of the call, there are several people have asked if you could finish your thoughts on independent schools. And there's a couple of bullet points, I believe, on that slide that we didn't get a chance to get to. So if I take us back there in the next 2 to 3 minutes, can you walk through those last couple of points you wanted to make on that?
Well, actually, one of them was just made, and that is that attempts at independent schools to improve alumni participation have mostly succeeded, and so they're capable of recapturing it. There is a question of retention, and it appears that the retention issue is a very, very important one here, so that retention has to be gone at just as strongly as the capturing, and that is my experience, and it's also Tracy's experience. Finally, I didn't get to touch very much on the affordability issue. The affordability issue at private schools is an issue. It's very much tied to this community issue that I speak about at the end, where schools positioning themselves to be community assets as well as educational bastions against the public schools. So it's in collaboration, and it is in communication, where the same kind of messages that have to occur in higher education that explain the economics also need to be made by private schools. And in doing so, I think that they get themselves out of the bind that they often are in, which is they are elite institutions. So I hope that ties things up, and I don't want to have the last word here, because if someone could handle one other question, perhaps in another sector, that would be great too.
Well, and Michael, we do have one that just came in, and I believe, Nancy, this may go for you, is the question of the status and outlook for corporate giving. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Willard touched on this a bit as well, that the sponsorship part, which is not covered in the Giving USA numbers, is a growing area. Certainly for arts and culture and humanities, and for other sectors as well. I sort of direct you to an article written by the Nonprofit Quarterly in terms of their additional analysis on corporate giving and why those numbers haven't increased, given that corporate profitability has increased. And it's a question. It's a concern that more corporations in this era of in recovery from the recession, and some are doing better, that the giving hasn't increased. But as we all know, corporations are tying contributions to their own bottom line and to their own ability to get something, if you will, in return for their contribution. But I think the future, again, as Willard has talked about it, is in the sponsorship area, and that's not going to be covered in these numbers.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, so I suppose we have to bring an end to the discussion, though I have a feeling that there are many questions that people still have and would like answers to. So I would just say that we will collect the questions. You're also welcome to email additional questions to me. You have my email. It's decheco@martsandlindy.com. And we will put together a question and answer sheet and send it out to everyone who participated today. And we'll also work with our panelists to perhaps publish some blogs around these topics. And we'll certainly send you links to those as we produce them. Nancy, did you want to send us out?
Yes. Thank you all. Keep in mind the optimism chart, which is 40 years of philanthropic giving in this country. The numbers continue perhaps to dip a bit, but are on their way back up, and it's up to all of us to make sure it goes up faster. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.